believed to be a stronghold of communist Viet Cong. The province was a frequent target of US and South Vietnamese bombings and attacks, so the entire region was heavily sprayed with the deadly herbicide Agent Orange. The 11th Infantry Brigade received word that the Viet Cong guerrillas had taken control of the neighboring village of Sun Mai. The division was sent to the area for a search and destroy mission, and army commanders had advised their soldiers that all who were found in the Sun Mai area could be considered Viet Cong sympathizers, and so they ordered them to destroy the entire village. And guess what? They found no Viet Cong. Instead, they came across a quiet village, primarily of women, children, and older men preparing their breakfast. The villagers were rounded up into groups as the soldiers inspected their huts. And despite finding only a few weapons, Lieutenant William Calley ordered the village burned down. And then he ordered his men to begin shooting the villagers. Some soldiers refused to follow those orders, but many did follow them. Hugh Thompson, an Army helicopter pilot, landed his aircraft between the soldiers and the retreating villagers, and he threatened to open fire if they continued their attack. Thompson and his crew flew dozens of survivors to receive medical care. But by the time the My Lai massacre ended, 504 people were dead. 173 of them were children, including 56 infants. And the officers immediately made efforts to downplay the bloodshed. It was not just downplayed. They began to deny that it even happened. The cover-up continued until Ron Ridenour, a soldier who heard reports of the massacre, began a campaign to bring the events to light. He wrote letters to President Nixon, the Pentagon, and several congressmen, but he didn't get a single reply. So Ridenour finally gave an interview to an investigative journalist who broke the story in November 1969. The Army would later charge only 14 men, including Calley. All were acquitted, except for William Calley, who was found guilty of premeditated murder for ordering the shooting, despite his plea that he was only following orders. Calley was given a life sentence for his role in directing the killings at My Lai. But many saw William Calley as just a scapegoat, and his sentence was reduced upon appeal to 20 years, then later to 10 years. Then he was paroled in 1974, so he had a grand total of 3 years in jail. The aftermath of the My Lai massacre caused morale to plummet even further, as soldiers wondered what other terrible acts their superiors were concealing. When soldiers came home after the war, they were not met with parades or being called heroes like those who fought in World War I or World War II. Instead, they were spat at. People called them baby killers. Anti-war protests grew after the massacre. College students often took the lead in organizing the protest. They protested the draft, as well as the companies that made weapons used in Vietnam. By the end of 1968, students held anti-war demonstrations on nearly 75% of college campuses. Some young men protested by publicly burning their draft cards. Others avoided military service by moving to Canada. Many Americans, however, criticized the anti-war movement as anti-American. For some Americans, the anti-war movement was part of a larger rejection of traditional values and government authority. You know, the man. Some built countercultures by developing their own codes and values, and members of these countercultures called themselves hippies. And we emphasize individual freedom, nonviolence, and communal sharing. What's mine is yours. We reject traditional society by growing our hair long, wearing bright colors and clothes, singing together, but others view us in war protest as something bad. The sitting president, LBJ, lost so much support that he went on live television and told Americans, "I will not seek and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as president." So, it was Bobby Kennedy's time to shine. JFK's little brother was sure to be the next president of the United States. Bobby argued that the United States should do everything to negotiate a quick and peaceful end to the Vietnam War. Kennedy won the California primary, and there he was giving a victory speech when he was assassinated by a man named Sirhan Sirhan. Another Kennedy gone from this world. And so the Republican nominee, Richard Nixon, promised to restore order to American society and bring peace with honor to Vietnam. Nixon won the election. Nixon wanted to get U.S. troops out of Vietnam without creating the appearance that they lost. He said, "I will not be the first president of the United States to lose a war." Nixon began withdrawing American troops from Vietnam. But without the knowledge of Congress or the American public, he approved bombing raids on Cambodia and Laos, two countries that America was not at war with. Nixon announced that he had sent U.S. troops into Cambodia to attack communist bases, but many Americans were furious. Rather than seeking peace, Nixon seemed to be expanding the war. Student protests erupted on hundreds of college campuses. On May 4th, at Kent State University in Ohio, the National Guard was called in to break up a demonstration. When students refused to leave, Guard troops used tear gas. Some students began throwing rocks at the National Guard. Then several Guard troops opened fire into the crowd of students, and 4 were killed. Horrified by the killings, anti-war activists expanded their protest all over the country. Anti-war feelings grew in 1971 when the New York Times published secret government documents known as the Pentagon Papers. These documents revealed that the U.S. officials had been lying to the American public about the progress of the war for years. The anti-war protests did lead to the passing of the 26th Amendment, which lowered the federal voting age from 21 to 18. Because if you're old enough to be sent off to fight in a war and die, you should be considered old enough to vote for the people who sent you in the first place. But Americans' faith in their government was forever broken.
Tin soldiers and Nixon's coming. We're finally on our own. This summer I hear the drumming for dead in Ohio. Gotta get down to it. Soldiers are cutting us down. Should have been done long ago. What if you knew her and found her dead on the ground? How can you